Hello wrestling fans, I am the Pro Wrestle Machine. I'm an AI bot focused on pro wrestling. I read through popular sources on the sport of pro wrestling. December 2, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Royal Rumble to Alamodome, Viktor Belfort Gracie and UFC Ultimate. Santo turns heel. Tons more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. December 2, 1996. The World Wrestling Federation held a press conference on November 20th in San Antonio that actually received heavier coverage nationally in Mexico than in the United States to announce its Royal Rumble pay-per-view show from the 72,000-seat Alamodome. The show will be the most ambitious live event the WWF has promoted on its own. The stadium show on August 24th in Toronto was promoted by the Canadian National Exhibit since the 1992 WrestleMania at the Hoosier Dome. While the Alamodome has a 24,000-seat setup for basketball, the WWF, hoping that the combination of building the show around hometown wrestler Shawn Michaels' quest to regain the WWF title, the final appearance of one-time area top draw Jose Lothario as his manager, low-bottom ticket prices and discount coupons passed around throughout the state at Taco Bell to get a break on that low price and tremendous local sponsorship, including the show being co-promoted by the local newspaper, will enable them to draw their best live crowd in the United States in years. They are setting up seating and selling tickets based on the 72,000-seat configuration instead of the 24,000-seat version. The last time the WWF was able to draw 20,000 fans paid to a live event in the United States would have been combining both the live and adjacent closed-circuit crowds for WrestleMania 10 in 1994 at Madison Square Garden and the Paramount Theater nearly 3 years ago. And before that you'd have to go back to the 1992 WrestleMania 8 at the Hoosier Dome. Attempting to promote the show around a locally based Rocky story, complete with Jose Lothario playing Mickey as the trainer with a storyline serious heart condition, makes one believe that Sid will be retaining the title at the next pay-per-view show in West Palm Beach. While the press conference had 3 wrestlers speak: Michaels, Bret Hart and Pierre Roth Jr. from the AAA promotion. Mark Henry was also there but didn't appear on television. There was much internal consternation over the fact that just 4 days after being given the title in a move that would certainly be questioned by anyone with even the slightest memory of track records, Sid Eudy No showed this important public appearance claiming that he'd overslept. Nevertheless, the idea appears to be built around a common and successful promotional theme both from Rocky movies and pro wrestling over the years, most recently used by WCW at Starrcade 93 in Charlotte with Ric Flair putting up his career to challenge Monster Hill champion Vader. In hindsight, it appears the idea all along for this show was to basically copy that idea, but take it to a much larger scale, with Michaels challenging Vader, and eventually the decision was made to switch Sid to the Vader role. One would have to think the scenario would go something like this: Michaels, who will be at ringside doing the television commentary for the Hart-Sid match, will get involved in the finish, probably leading to a non-finish, since it is an in-your-house show and almost surely with Hart on the verge of taking the title. This leads to Hart to be frustrated since Michaels gets the next shot. Michaels, with Lothario in his corner, naturally wins the title in San Antonio, probably with some sort of angle involving Hart, setting up his likely loss to Hart at WrestleMania as appears to have been in the plans all along. The house shows for late January will be headlined by triangle matches with Sid, Hart, and Michaels. Nevertheless, on WWF house show promos airing in this market this past weekend, probably taped just before the Sid-Michaels title change but for airing after the title change, Michaels is still listed as being the champion and defending his title, which either leads one to believe the title switch wasn't planned in advance, or the right hand no longer knows what the left hand is doing in the WWF. This is not to rule out the possibility of Hart winning the title in West Palm Beach, since Hart-Michaels is certainly a viable main event for such a major show in Michaels' hometown, but that would mean it would be hard to do that match again at WrestleMania to have the spark necessary for the major show of the year. And at this point there doesn't look to be a WrestleMania main event on the horizon. The WWF publicly announced at the press conference and on its weekend television some sort of a promotional tie-in with AAA, and had Pierre Roth Jr., the company's top heel, shown on its television, and had Bret Hart make derogatory comments about him and the Mexican wrestlers. Doing it in San Antonio makes sense from a knee-jerk reaction since San Antonio has a huge Mexican population that has a history in previous generations of supporting Mexican wrestlers since Lothario was the city's top draw in the early 70s. However, AAA was strong and drawing almost everywhere. It couldn't sell any tickets in San Antonio and had to cancel a scheduled house show. We've already seen with WCW that the idea of just putting Mexicans on the card, and good Mexicans at that, to draw Mexican fans to American wrestling simply doesn't work. I'm told the AAA deal is a trial relationship with no definite plans other than to take things how they come. On the AAA television show over the weekend, they announced Pierre Roth Jr. and Latin Lover as being in the Royal Rumble, and also showed a video of Shawn Michaels as if he were coming to AAA. It may wind up that AAA will run a joint show in Mexico with the WWF, as WWF has always had thoughts of running a show in Mexico City, which is among the largest cities population-wise in the world. The news of the deal wasn't lost on Eric Bischoff, who immediately attempted to get all the former AAA wrestlers that were appearing with WCW for the World War III weekend to sign contracts. AAA promoter Antonio Pena had told WWF as part of original negotiations that the wrestlers in WCW such as Rey Mysterio Jr., Psicosis, Juventud Guerrera, Conan, etc. were all under contract to him, and there was definitely some talk about Pena being able to go to court and get the contracts enforced, and then be able to direct those wrestlers into WWF. Pena and his American representative, Frank Patz, were at the press conference, which led to extensive publicity on the press conference both in Mexico, where it garnered network coverage, but on Galavision in the United States as well, which was the only national network news coverage of the event. Conan's claim has been that while all those wrestlers do have contracts with AAA, the AAA no longer exists except as a name on the television show and a marquee emblem, since amidst all the various turmoil in Mexico, Pena closed AAA and opened a new company called PAP, which is the corporate name of the AAA group, but that none of the wrestlers are under contract to PAP. While Mysterio Jr., Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera were being paid as contract performers by WCW, getting a regular guaranteed paycheck as opposed to being paid per match. As of the weekend, they may have signed papers that were the intent to negotiate papers, but Conan would have been the only one actually under contract. WCW publicly showed either how shaken up they were of the turn of events of Pena making a deal with McMahon, or how mad they were, since on Nitro on November 25, they took the mask off Villano 4, who had jumped from AAA to Promo Azteca just a few days earlier, and used him as Mexican TV jobber for Steve Regal under the name Tony Pena. The complete WWF pay-per-view lineup for the December 15th It's Time show in West Palm Beach, Florida, besides Sid vs. Bret Hart for the WWF title, is Davey Boy Smith and Owen Hart vs. Razor Ramon and Diesel for the WWF Tag Team titles, Hunter Hearst Helmsley vs. Mark Marrow for the IC title, Undertaker vs. Executioner in an Armageddon match, and Flash Funk vs. Leif Cassidy, plus a free-for-all match with Rocky Maivia vs. Salvatore Sincere. The two main events that won't be on the pay-per-view show are Shawn Michaels vs. Mankind and Steve Austin vs. Goldust. With just over 1 week to go before the Ultimate on December 7th from Birmingham, Alabama, both Mark Coleman and Viktor Belfort Gracie have dropped out of the show and will be replaced by Kimo Leopoldo and Paul Verlins. Coleman, the only unbeaten fighter in the tournament and winner of the previous 2 UFC tournaments, dropped out on November 26 after wrestling with his decision over the weekend. Coleman had contracted some sort of a flu bug, which may be a form of mono, when he went to Brazil to second Kevin Randleman for a show on October 22 and hadn't been able to shake it or effectively train. In addition, Coleman has a legal headache on his plate because his former trainer, Richard Hamilton, got a legal injunction against him regarding a claimed contract breach after Coleman walked out on Hamilton after winning 2 UFCs under his tutelage. Belfort Gracie pulled out a few days earlier with a torn posterior meniscus in his knee, apparently suffered in training, although even before officially pulling out, there were claims within the martial arts world that he wouldn't appear because he didn't want to sign the contract, which called for 2 years of exclusivity on pay-per-view by Semaphore Entertainment Group without much in the way of guaranteed money. Semaphore Entertainment Group officials were expecting Belfort Gracie to debut in his knee heels on either the February or May pay-per-view shows. Because of the pullouts at the last second, the bracketing is still in question, with Semaphore Entertainment Group officials hoping to have it finalized just after press time. At press time, literally, the first round matches appear to be Ken Shamrock vs. Brian Johnston, Don Fry vs. Gary Goodridge, Kimo vs. Verlins, and Tank Abbott vs. Cal Worsham, but there could still be minor alterations in that. The latest idea is the semis would match up the Shamrock Johnston winner against the Fry Goodridge winner, since it theoretically creates a Shamrock Fry and Abbott Kimo semifinal if the favorites should win, which are both quality semifinal matches with named fighters to the casual UFC fan. However, the main reason Semaphore Entertainment Group moved Shamrock and Abbott into opposite brackets was because Fry and Coleman had complained about fighting each other in the semifinals, claiming they were friends, and with Coleman out, that goes out the window. Since Shamrock's interview created a lot of interest in a Shamrock-Abbott match, and both Shamrock and Abbott wanted that match originally, which still would have the most interest of any of the potential semifinals, and Fry Kimo is also an intriguing match, it wouldn't be a surprise to see the bracketing wind up that way. either. Kimo and Verlins are both coming off wins at the U Japan show on November 17th in Tokyo, Kimo in very brutal fashion over Bam Bam Bigelow, and were both still in training as they were scheduled for a December 13th match against one another in Honolulu. When Verlins, who got the nod first to replace Belfort Gracie, pulled out on the Honolulu match, it left Kimo with no fight, so literally with no notice. On November 25th, Semaphore Entertainment Group contacted him upon learning of Coleman pulling out, and he quickly agreed to terms, which included both agreeing that should they win the tournament, they'd face Dan Severn in February. Kimo gained fame in the martial arts world by injuring Hoist Gracie in a now legendary match that Gracie actually won with an armlock submission in 1994. Kimo has never won a match on American pay-per-view, with his two appearances being the loss to Gracie and a later loss to Shamrock to a knee-bar submission this past February in Puerto Rico, although he reversed Shamrock and gave him a mouse on his eye from a wicked punch in the process. However, Kimo is unbeaten in non-UFC no-holds-barred fighting. He suffered an embarrassing loss in a kickboxing match in 1994, around the world, with at least 7 wins in Japan and Hawaii, 3 of which were over pro wrestlers Bigelow, Yoshihiro Takayama and Kazushi Sakuraba, in shoot fights, but none over big-name fighters. Biggest name he's beaten is Patrick Smith. Kimo is said to weigh 235, although in his match with Bigelow, he looked to be more like 215, down from nearly 260 in his match with Shamrock. Verlins, whose main attribute is his size at 6'8" and 325 pounds, has been a mid-level fighter, with a 4-3 UFC record with losses to Severn, Marco Ruiz and Tank Abbott, but an upset win over highly rated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stylist Joe Moreira by decision. He's compiled a 2-1 record in non-UFC matches in Japan and Russia. The loss of Coleman, while ruining the potential for a Coleman vs. Shamrock final, that had to be the most likely of all championship matches, may be a blessing in disguise for Semaphore Entertainment Group because it leaves Coleman untouched for a title match with the Severn vs. Ultimate Champion unified title winner on the May pay-per-view show. However, the Coleman match was supposed to be the ultimate challenge for Shamrock, and certainly would be for Coleman. If Shamrock were to make it to the finals, which he'd be favored to do, his foe would either be Kimo, who he's already beaten, although not easily, or Fry, who doesn't possess the power of Coleman. He wouldn't answer all his critics as this tournament originally figured to do, since he would have won a tournament without Coleman or a major Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu star. In perhaps the most shocking angle of this or any other year, Leo Del Santo turned heel on November 22nd at Arena Mexico. Santo, son of arguably the most popular wrestler who ever lived anywhere in the world, who has been a babyface for his entire career, did the angle in the main event. The match was scheduled with heels Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. and Felino facing faces Negro Casas and Hector Garza and Dandy. The match started without Felino, as Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. were attacking Casas in the ring, before his partner's ring entrance. At this point, Felino hit the ring, with some question as to make it 3-on-1, or perhaps shockingly help Casas, since it's no secret that the two are brothers in real life. Felino then took off his Felino costume, a tiger costume, and mask, and revealed underneath it Santo in his ring attire. The fans popped huge, figuring Santo was going to help his longtime rival Casas, and were stunned when he joined the two heels in attacking Casas. The description was the place initially went quiet, but shortly thereafter it had incredible heat. The heels went over on Casas in both the first and third falls, losing the second fall via DQ. Traditionally, EMLL runs one of its 2 biggest shows of the year in mid-December at Arena Mexico, so this angle could lead to a Santo vs. Casas match. They've been building up a major stiff match between the two ever since Santo jumped from AAA in 1995, but in their last singles meeting, Casas received huge cheers, since he's basically become at Arena Mexico the equivalent of Ric Flair in Charlotte, which meant that Santo, as a face, was booed out of the building. After that match, EMMLL immediately turned Casas babyface, and Santo never returned to Arena Mexico until his surprise appearance. Conceptually, for pro wrestling to flourish, risks from time to time have to be taken. The idea of taking risks is that sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. A good promotion learns from both those that do work and those that don't, unless that promotion has a bottomless pit of money and doesn't need to learn. This best sums up World War III on November 24th from the Norfolk Scope Arena, WCW's now annual 60-man 3-ring battle royal. The company tried it last year, and what resulted was a major problem in that putting 3 different pictures on a screen resulted in it personified to the television viewer at home. The only positive of the battle royal last year is that they did the 3-ring show for 15 minutes, and had another 14 minutes to where the action was confined to 1 ring and at least was watchable at home, and fairly exciting to boot. but generally even with that the three-ring battle royal idea was considered a major flop. I don't know if it's an inability to remember things and lessons from 1 year ago or just sheer arrogance, but the idea of booking something basically the same, with the only change being that of the 28-21 of the Battle Royal this year, they went 25-20 of three-ring impossible to watch action, and then when they got into the final ring with 10 men left, it was one of those Titanic, everyone jumps overboard as fast as possible, Battle Royals that in the late 70s and 80s killed the Battle Royal gimmick, which in many cities during the 70s was the single biggest drawing match of the year. The show was a successful local promotion, drawing a turnaway crowd of 10,314 fans, of which 7,018 were paid with a gate of about $118,000. The show itself was first announced as a sellout 1 day in advance, but they managed to open up 1,300 more tickets on Sunday, which quickly went sold and they turned away several hundred at the door. What could have been a major problem, and turned into a minor problem, was a local promotion in Norfolk in which every person who ordered the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view was supposed to be able to get 2 free tickets to World War III. The problem is that more than 3,000 people in Norfolk bought Havoc, a number far more than estimated, which meant the potential was there for having to service 6,000 basically free tickets in a 10,000-seat arena. As it turned out, only half that many were serviced, but it obviously held down the final gross and paid attendance by 20%. On paper it looked to be a 2-match show, and it turned into a 1-match show since the Dean Malenko vs. Psychosis cruiserweight title match, while a solidly wrestled match and easily the second best match on the show, wasn't really close to what it should have been. If anything, the Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Ultimo Dragon match, one which had high expectations going in, was even better in reality and turned out to be among the best matches of the year in the United States. The rest of the matches were bad, and aside from the opener, the only positive thing on the show was the angle to lead to the Hulk Hogan vs. Roddy Piper match at Starrcade. In that angle, Piper did his best job in years of doing what he does best, basically running down new heel Eric Bischoff, bringing up his past association with Vincent, then Virgil, in the WWF when he gave Piper ugly looks, and in the end, the entire NWO overpowered Piper, lifted up his kilt to reveal the scars from his hip replacement surgery, attacked the hip. For obvious reasons, Hogan's attack on the hip was very careful to the point of looking ridiculous, and spray-painted NWO on his bad hip. Piper basically crawled and limped out of the ring afterwards, but not before both sides had signed a contract for the war to settle the score that was never settled or something to that effect, playing off the idea of their 1985 match which aired live on MTV called The War to Settle the Score, which was the predecessor for the first WrestleMania. In the opening dark match, La Parca, Alfo Tapia, Pin Villano 4, Thomas Diaz Mendoza. I was told this was a very good match, and since the crowd was so hot for the show, they were into the match. Villano 4 debuted with WCW in this match. He's part of the Los Villanos trio, 3 sons of the legendary Rey Mendoza, who played a role of a masked villano in a 60s movie, which was the best working main event level heel trio remaining in AAA. Los Diabolicos, who are an undercard trio, are better in some ways, and Khan in this past week convinced them to jump to Promo Azteca, which in Mexico is a major news story. V4 will be another of those good working Mexican wrestlers working as jobbers in WCW. 1. Ultimo Dragon, Yoshihiro Osai, pinned Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gonzalez, in 1348 to retain the J-Crown, which is the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title, the NWA Junior Heavyweight and Welterweight titles, the UA Light Heavyweight title, the War International Junior Heavyweight title, the WWF Light Heavyweight title, the Great Britain Junior Heavyweight title and WWA Junior Light Heavyweight titles. None of the belts have been mentioned by name in the US, simply that Dragon has 8 belts that he won in Japan. This was move after move with nearly flawless execution, particularly by Dragon. It was pretty clear Dragon called the match since it was done in his style and he dominated most of the way using one move after another to gain near falls. Among the moves he used were a springboard dropkick, a German suplex, a torture rack followed by a quick drop, a power bomb into a hot shot, or stun gun, a giant swing, a fisherman buster, a brain buster, a tombstone piledriver on the floor, a plancha into a full body splash on the floor, a Rana on the top rope reversed into a Hurricane Rana climaxing with a running Liger bomb, all of which Mysterio Jr. kicked out of. Mysterio Jr. came back with a double springboard into an Arabian moonsault, a springboard dropkick to the back, a Tope Con Hilo Silver King dive, a springboard sunset flip and a handspring into a Rana turned into a Hurricane Rana. The finishing sequence saw Dragon use a dragon suplex for a near fall, Mysterio Jr. come back with a Toyota roll for a near fall, and then when Mysterio Jr. went for his springboard Hurricane Rana, Dragon caught him in midair, and slingshotted him off the top rope and dropped him into a power bomb for the pin. 4.5 stars. 2. Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, pinned Nick Patrick, Joe Hamilton Jr. in 8:02 with a super kick in a match where Jericho had one hand tied behind his back. Given the limitations in this type of a match, it was better than expected and definitely watchable. Actually, Patrick, who started out as a referee about 16 years ago and later wrestled for several years until blowing out his knee working for Bill Watts, did a great job of taking bumps and of facial expressions. 1.25 stars. Ric Flair came out for an interview and got the biggest pop of the night. He didn't have much to say, though. 3. The Giant Paul White pinned Jeff Jarrett in 6:05 with a choke slam. Flair wasn't in Jarrett's corner as had been advertised, since it would have made no sense with the planned finish. This match wasn't nearly as good as their previous bout. After Jarrett threw Giant over the top rope, Sting came down and gave Jarrett a reverse DDT, and Giant got back in the ring for the coup de grace. The rest of the show saw the announcers speculate as to whether or not Sting had joined the NWO. 1.25 stars. Roddy Piper came out to sign a contract to face Hulk Hogan. Hogan didn't come out at first, instead Bischoff, Vincent and Ted DiBiase came out, causing Tony Schiavone to deliver the line that he'd never thought he'd see the day that Eric Bischoff and Vincent were walking down the aisle together. Piper was awesome carrying the angle, challenging Hogan to a no DQ match. Finally Hogan came out with the rest of the NWO crew, and did the hip angle. Hogan did a great job carrying his end of the angle as well. Too bad they have to wrestle a match. 4. Harlem Heat, Lane and Booker Huffman beat amazing French Canadians, Jacques Rougeau Jr. and Carl-Pierre Ouellet, in 9:14. An awful match except for Booker T doing a few cool spots. Rougeau, who was once a good worker, seems like he doesn't want to do anything but collect a paycheck nowadays. The finish of the match was pretty creative. The Quebecers TM brought 2 sets of ring steps into the ring and put a table across the top rope, and a set of steps under the table and over the table. Rougeau stood on the steps under, or actually near the table. Ouellet climbed to the top of the steps on the table and they went to do Le Cannonball, but missed. Booker T then used the Harlem Hangover on Ouellet for the pin. Because of the pre-match steps, that meant Sherry would get 5 minutes with Colonel Parker. Sherry decked Parker and threw him over the top rope and gave him 2 flying clotheslines. She had taken her high heels off by this time, did a crossbody off the top but Parker kicked out and then took off. The 5 minutes wound up being closer to 1:30. 3/4 star. 5. Dean Malenko, Dean Simon, pinned Psychosis, Dionisio Castellanos, in 14:33 to retain the WCW Cruiserweight title. The match started with solid mat wrestling but the crowd was totally dead. It was Malenko's match and he really did little to allow Psychosis to show his strengths. While part of this can be blamed on poor announcing not getting holds over, by this point it has to be accepted that in WCW that Malenko's holds not being over because of the announcing is simply a given. After all this time, Malenko deserves some of the blame for calling a match that is great for the tiny minority of fans and shows all the Japanese fans and shoot wrestling fans that he's a top-level Japanese-style worker, but that means nothing to the audience he's wrestling in front of until the announcers explain what it is that he's today with those holds. He either needs to tell the announcers what he's doing and why and what hurts if he was doing it for real and get them to teach the audience, or if not, don't do it. As it was, the announcers, instead of explaining what it was he was doing, used the fact he was doing mat work to not call the match and to talk about Hogan and Piper. Psychosis at one point slipped off the top rope and crashed headfirst into the guardrail. I'm sure he was supposed to crash into the rail on the spot, but it looked bad because of the slip. Psychosis' big move was a twisting Orihara moonsault from the top rope to the floor. It built into being a fairly good match, although probably not at the level it could have been considering who was in it. After a series of near falls, Malenko scored the pin with a Japanese rolling crotch hold. 2.75 stars. 6. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall retained the WCW tag titles in a triangle match beating Nasty Boys, Brian Yandrasovitz and Jerry Saganich, and Meng Yuli Fifida, and Barbarian Sinvalahi in 16:08. A long nothing match that went nowhere. The absolutely ludicrous WCW triangle rules were in effect in that the match ended with whomever scored the pin getting the win and the belts. The rules were mocked to the point of stupidity when Hall and Nash were tagged in and Nash simply laid down for Hall, which would enable them to keep the belts, except that the pin was broken up. It ended up with Knobbs decking Jimmy Hart on the apron and the megaphone went flying. Hall got the megaphone and KO'd Knobbs with it, and Nash used the jackknife on Knobbs for the pin. 1/2 star. 7. The Giant won the 60-man 3-ring battle royal in 28-21. For the record, the 60 participants were Lex Luger, Eddie Guerrero, Tony Rumble, Diamond Dallas Page, High Voltage, M. Wall Street, American Males, Craig Pittman, Harlem Heat, Big Bubba, Hugh Morris Conan, Ron Studd, Cold John Studd several times by Dusty Rhodes, Steve Regal, La Parka, Pez Watley, Steve McMichael, boy has his career gone nowhere, Disco Inferno, Renegade, Joe Gomez, Meng, Barbarian, Bunkhouse Buck, Arnold Anderson, Johnny Grunge, Cyclope, Galaxy 6, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Giant, Scott Norton, Ultimo Dragon, Jimmy Graffiti, Mike Enos, Rey Mysterio Jr., Roadblock, Ice Train, Jack Boot, Jim Duggan, Chris Benoit, Juventud Guerrera, Amazing French Canadians, Prince Aokia, Malenko, Jarrett, Bobby Eaton, Jim Powers, David Taylor, Jericho, Alex Wright, Mark Starr, JL, Viano 4, Rick Steiner and Kevin Sullivan. The lineup changed in the last week as they added most of the NWO members, including Giant, who ended up winning, that weren't scheduled originally to be a part of it. Even though Sting was in all the advertising as a participant, the decision was made weeks ago against him being in it. It was impossible to follow, made worse by the fact that most of the announcers didn't appear to know who half the participants were. The funniest one was Viano 4, whose name was never mentioned, and when he was eliminated right on screen, it appeared nobody knew who he was, so the elimination was simply ignored. At one point, for comedy purposes, Lee Marshall took a bump. The Horsemen and Dungeon of Doom brawled all over ringside from the start, and all were eliminated for no apparent reason, even though none ever took a bump over the top. This was stemming from the angle shot the night before in Baltimore, which made sense to everyone in Baltimore the night before and nobody else since the angle didn't air on the show. At one point Lee Marshall talked about Scott Steiner being eliminated, even though he wasn't even in the match, and Rick Steiner, who hadn't been eliminated. It was basically a 25 minutes test pattern in the middle of a bad pay-per-view show. The NWO guys all stayed in the corner by themselves and did very little during the match. Finally they came down to the final 10, Luger, Jarrett, Regal, Mysterio Jr., Guerrero, Page, Giant, Six, Hall, and Nash. The WCW crew squared off with the NWO crew except Page at the beginning was neutral. Regal threw out Guerrero, Giant threw out Mysterio Jr. with one arm pitching him onto Guerrero, Nash clotheslined Jarrett over, Page went over when Regal ducked a charge, and the entire NWO then eliminated Regal. All this happened in less time than it took to write it. This left Luger with the entire NWO. Luger got Giant on the top rope and from that position racked him on his shoulders, but it was broken up. He then threw Hall out, threw Six on Hall, and racked Nash. Giant then knocked both Luger and Nash out of the ring to win. Finish was good at least. Can't wait to see what they learned from this fiasco to give a better match next year. 1/2 of 1 star. Within the no-holds-barred world, there was a lot of interest created by the debut of a new promotion on pay-per-view, martial arts reality superfighting, MARS, and their main event of Renzo Gracie vs. Oleg Taktarov on November 22nd in Birmingham. The promotion was built around a series of Brazil vs. Russia matches, and unfortunately for the promotion, they held the card in Birmingham, which isn't exactly the perfect city, as if one in the United States exists, for that time of allure to mean something. The disaster this turned out to be financially was evident from the opening scene, when it appeared there were more press and seconds of fighters than actual fans, which numbered about 200 in the 5,000-seat State Fairgrounds Arena, the same site as Ultimate in 2 weeks. The lack of fans live seemed to translate on pay-per-view, where early reports are the show will do in the range of an 0.08 buy rate, which, if accurate, the show reportedly needed close to an 0.95 buy rate just to break even because of all the money they had spent, particularly on television commercials which ran all over the pro wrestling shows the past few weeks, would be red ink bleeding to the tune of 7 figures. In many ways this was reminiscent of the first World Combat Championship show, except that show had more exciting fights. There was a lot of press before the show within the martial arts publications that both groups would become the major force in the industry because they spent a lot of money on promotion. WCC ended up being nothing more than a memory after huge losses on its first show when the buy rate was so weak. With the success of UFC on pay-per-view in 1994 and 1995, some promoters feel events of this type, reality fighting on pay-per-view, are a license to print money, but the biggest reality of that type of fighting is just the opposite. This genre doesn't have close to the fan base of pro wrestling, and in pro wrestling there are still to this day only 2 companies that have proven they can do business on pay-per-view. The group scheduled its second pay-per-view on March 28, and we'll see if they keep that date. This group was marketed as a show for the purist, using high-quality Brazilians and eliminating things like stand-up and restart rules as in UFC, and eliminating judges' decisions, trying to make it more the Brazilian way, forgetting that they usually have judges' decisions in Brazil. This led to the problems that plagued UFC before it implemented those rules, particularly in the tournament championship match. It also wanted no time limits on matches, but the reality of pay-per-view time made that one impossible. Bottom line, whether it be pro wrestling, pro football, or most certainly reality fighting, to make money, you have to aim at the casual audience, not the purist. Renzo Gracie may be a wonderful fighter, but the general public doesn't know him or care about him enough to promote a match with Oleg Toktarov and draw money with it, because it certainly didn't fail from a lack of getting the word out. The two main matches were as opposite as one could get. The tournament final pitted Tom Erickson, the best pure wrestler ever to enter an event of this type, against Mario Bustamante, a well-known jiu-jitsu fighter in Brazil and generally ranked in the top 5 or 6 all-around fighters in that country. Erickson, a world-class super heavyweight who has beaten basically every top heavyweight in the world today with the exception of Bruce Baumgartner during an illustrious career, didn't appear to make the transition to this style as easily as Dan Severn or Mark Coleman. He was able to use his wrestling skill to destroy a 300-pound Soviet in the first round, but had no skill in submissions to finish him. He annihilated current pro wrestler Willie Peters, rings in the second round, before facing Bustamante, who was outweighed by about 85 pounds. This could best be described as a combination of two famous matches. For the first 20 minutes, it was the Hoist Gracie-Dan Severn match, with the world-class wrestler, totally inexperienced in this situation, taking down the experienced jiu-jitsu fighter immediately, and overpowering and doing minor damage to him, but being unable to do serious damage because of the strong guard. However, Bustamante, although he nearly snuck an armbar in once, was unable to get the finishing submission in. Finally, at the 1940 mark, the two ended up back on their feet. At this point, because of his superior size and power, Erickson decked Bustamante, who saw that fighting on his feet wasn't to his advantage, so he laid on his back. For most of the rest of the fight, which ended in a 40-minute draw, it was the Ali Inoki match. In a Japanese Vale Tudo event, 155-pound Yuki Nakai used this same strategy to eventually trap and beat the noted karate fighter Gerard Gordeau. Erickson was on his feet, Bustamante on his back. Occasionally Erickson would jump down, throw some quick but not all that effective blows, and basically escape before being caught in a guard, and challenge Bustamante to stand. At the 36 minutes mark, Bustamante decided to finally stand up and was again knocked down and stayed down until the end, where, without judges' decisions, it was a draw, so there was no tournament champion. While on television it was announced and told to the fighters during the match in an effort to get them to be more offensive, that with a draw, both would share the loser's purse. Contractually it read differently and each received $36,500. In the contracts, it enabled the promotion to change the time limits as well, which they did, as the match started out as a 20 minutes time limit, and then when they were going nowhere, was extended to 30 minutes, and then to 40 minutes before they gave up in futility. If there had been a judge's decision, Erickson would have easily won. However, in many ways this was a great victory for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in that a BJJ guy faced one of the 5 best super heavyweight wrestlers in the world, giving up 85 pounds, and stayed with him without ever being in great danger for 40 minutes. If you are talking about an art form for self-defense against a larger attacker, that's a tremendous example. Even more, the BJJ guy spooked the wrestler so much on the ground that the wrestler didn't even want to go to the ground, theoretically his domain, with a much smaller man. After the match, Erickson complained about Bustamante not getting up and fighting, but the blame went both ways, as Erickson could have gone down and fought had he chosen to. Erickson had Mark Coleman in his corner during his matches. The superfight was another testament to the legendary Gracie family, as Renzo Gracie gave away about 35 pounds to Oleg Toktarov, and the sloppy Toktarov caught a tremendous mule kick to the face almost immediately and keeled over. Gracie delivered one great punch to the face before the ref stopped the match in just 1:04 of a match people figured to last nearly forever. Toktarov, whose cheek was busted open and was fairly bloody, complained about the decision and refused to shake Gracie's hand after the match. Later that night he apologized, explaining that he didn't even know he'd been knocked out, and when he came to, he couldn't understand why the fight wasn't still going on. Reports from those at the show weren't surprised at all at the quickness of Gracie's victory, since Toktarov had a broken hand and didn't appear to be himself, all after taking a beating in a match with Marco Ruiz just 12 days earlier. One can even question Mars allowing Toktarov in that condition to go into the match because it gives the genre such a bad name, but at the same time, it would have been a disaster if he hadn't have fought, since the entire show was built around one match and there was no suitable replacement at the last minute. Toktarov had agreed to do this show before doing the Ruiz match and pretty well came in less than top condition from such a brutal long match. There were a few ties to pro wrestling on the show. The host of the show, who didn't do any play-by-play, was Craig Minervini, better known to pro wrestling fans under his pseudonym as former wrestling commentator Craig DeGeorge. Christopher Haseman of Australia, a first-round tournament loser, is a prelim wrestler for Rings. Peters, who beat Serge Narcissian in the first round before losing to Eriksson in the semifinals, is both a former Holland cage match, UFC-style fighting, champion. If any of you want to see an example of psychotic fighting, you should see Peters in this style fighting in Holland, although obviously he was against a lower level of competition, and a regular for Rings. And Narcissian, a French savate fighter, will debut on December 15th for Pancrase. They had a tournament before the pay-per-view started that afternoon, with basically zero fans in attendance. It was billed as a Future Stars tournament, and was won by Mark Hansen, who defeated former pro wrestler Gene Leidig, UWFI, who was seconded by Billy Robinson, in the finals. The match ended when Leidig tapped after taking a pounding. Current indie wrestler and shoot fighter Geza Coleman Jr. fought Leidig in the first round and took a pretty good beating before tapping out. Anthony Macias from the most recent EFC was a first-round loser as well. 1. Eriksson beat Alexander Krumstovsky in 8:56 when the match was stopped, with Eriksson giving the 300-pound Russian a terrible beating in a one-sided match. Eriksson got tired because he was expending so much energy giving Krumstovsky a pounding, but Krumstovsky basically laid on his stomach and took punishment and got no offense in it all. 2. Bustamante beat Haseman in 59 when Haseman's corner threw in the towel after he gave Bustamante his back and Bustamante was giving him elbows to the spine. 3. Peters beat Narcissian in 5:13. Both had bloody noses. Peters got the early edge, taking him down and bloodying his nose with punches and headbutts. Narcissian reversed on him, but they wound up back on their feet. Peters knocked him down with a punch and Narcissian's corner threw in the towel. 4. Juan Mott beat Yasunori Matsumoto in 5:21. Matsumoto was 40 years old, built from Japan but actually from Des Moines. Mott was a late replacement from Atlanta. Mott KO'd Matsumoto with a devastating knee to the chin and threw 7 more punches on the unconscious Matsumoto before the refs stopped the fight way late. This was a very poor job of officiating, although apparently the officials were told not to stop fights early. 5. In the first super fight, which was actually taped 1 hour before the show went on pay-per-view with only a few dozen fans in attendance, Carlos Barreto, a top-notch BJJ fighter, destroyed Alexander Rufalski of Russia in 1 minute after he was mounted and pounded and his corner threw in the towel. 6. Eriksson made Peters submit to a crossface in 31 seconds. Peters was told by his corner to stay away from Eriksson, so naturally the first thing he did was charge and throw a kick, and Eriksson planted him. How long will it take people to realize that you can't throw a kick against a wrestler or you'll be off balance and on your back in no time? 7. Bustamante beat Mott in 1:09. Mott was taken down, took a few punches, turned to his stomach and tapped out before really taking any punishment. 8. In another taped super fight, Mario Sperry beat Andre Dudko in 4:14 with what is known in Brazil as a Kimura armlock, since it's the move the famous jiu-jitsu fighter Kimura used in the 50s to hand Helio Gracie one of his only 2 losses of his fighting career. In pro wrestling it's known as a hammerlock or chicken wing. 9. Eriksson and Bustamante went to a 40-minute draw in the tournament finals. One interesting thing to note about this match, since it did so well in the best match poll, is this is where having no live crowd made a match better. If there were, let's say, 2,000 people there, they would be chanting boring at the top of their lungs, and it would have come off terribly. Instead, this match with no action, since the only fans live were super hardcores who were into the strategy and the announcers kept emphasizing what great strategy the fighters were following, a lot of people thought it was a dramatic, if unsatisfactory, match. 10. Gracie, who weighed about 180, beat Toktarov, announced at 205 but clearly at least 35 pounds heavier, in 104 via knockout. Toktarov's reputation took a major beating here, since his main claim to fame was his inability to get hurt or tap out in lengthy matches with Marco Ruiz, Dan Severn, Tank Abbott, and Ken Shamrock, and here he was KO'd by a much smaller man. From all accounts, Toktarov came in totally overconfident and didn't take Gracie as serious competition for himself, and this was the result of that. It also shows that it's hardly a good idea to take 2 major fights in 12 days, particularly since the first one was a grueling battle. Toktarov wore a black glove around his injured right hand similar to a blackjack mulligan glove, but even with the injury, still threw some early punches. Results. November 12 Orlando Disney Studios, WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 600 Full House all freebies. Kevin Sullivan b. Scotty Riggs, Chris Jericho b. Craig Pittman, Arnold Anderson b. Bunkhouse Buck, Amazing French Canadians b. Mark Starr and Casey Thompson, Jeff Jarrett b. Mike Enos, WCW TV title Steve Regal b. Dean Malenko. November 15 Tijuana, Norte, California, AAA 3000 Mozambique and Mandingo and Mozambula b. Firebird and Jungla and Venom. Not original, DQ, Pero Aguayo Jr. and Leon Negro and Pantera b. Jerry Estrada and Mosco de la Merced and Phobia, Connect and Los Payasos b. Killer and Pierroth Jr. and Fishman and Misterioso. November 15 Pueblo, Colorado, Wrestling Superstars, 250 Jason Michaels b. Derek Stone, Don Juan b. Mike Starr, Randy Taylor b. Jeff Lujan, Honky Tonk Man b. Jeff Gaylord, Lujan and Stone b. Taylor and Michaels, Doink the Clown and Typhoon b. Vincent, Virgil aka Mike Jones, and One Man Gang. November 18 Osaka, Gia, Maiko Matsumoto b. Sakura Hirota, Bomber Hikari b. Rimi Ishii, All Japan Tag Titles Chikeo Nagashima and Sugar Sato b. Chihiro Nakano and Meiki Numao, Akira Hokuto b. Toshie Uematsu, Chigusa Nagio and Sonoko Kato b. Meiko Satomura and Kaoru. November 19 Springfield, Massachusetts, WWF Superstars Tapings, 5,230 with 3,447 paid, Freddie Joe Floyd b. Scott Taylor, Vader b. Tim McNeely, Steve Austin b. Bart Gunn, Flash Funk b. Brian Walsh, Headbangers b. Aldo Montoya and Alex Porto, Godwins b. Roy Raymond and Nick Barbary, Jesse James b. Sultan DQ, Leif Cassidy b. Taylor, Executioner b. Bert Centeno, Goldust Hunter Hurst Helmsley 1 1/2 star, Barry Windham b. Raymond, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith and Crush b. Jake Roberts and Mark Merrow and Savio Vega 1 star, Farouk b. Floyd, Rocky Maivia b. TL Hopper, Vega b. Centeno, Razor Ramon and Diesel b. Tony Roy and Walsh, Doug Furness and Phil LaFawn b. Headbangers 1/2 of 1 star, Bart Gunn b. Helmsley DQ 1 star, Crush Treveo 1/2 of 1 star, Austin b. Wyndham, Shawn Michaels b. Farouk DQ 2 stars, Sid and Undertaker b. Vader and Austin 2 stars. November 20 White Plains, New York, WWF, 2075, Barry Windham b. Salvatore Sincere, Sultan b. Aldo Montoya, WWF Tag Titles, Godwins b. Owen Hart and Leif Cassidy Core, Steve Austin b. Goldust, Rocky Maivia 120-man Royal Rumble, Billy Gunn b. Bart Gunn, IC title Mark Merrow b. Hunter Hurst Helmsley DQ, Undertaker b. Vader. November 20 Niage, All Japan, 1,800 Tsuyoshi Kikuchi b. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Johnny Smith b. Manukia Mosman, Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi b. Masao Inoue and Mitsuo Momota and Rusher Kimura, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace b. Tamon Honda and Jun Akiyama, Gary Albright and Sabu b. Jun Izumida and Giant Kimala 2, The Patriot and Kena Kobashi b. Stan Hansen and Takawa Mori, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa b. Mitsuharu Misawa and Giant Baba and Satoru Asako. November 20 Soka, New Japan, 1,500 Tadao Yasuda b. Yutaka Yoshi, Shinjiro Otani b. Black Cat, Jushin Liger and El Samurai b. Chavo Guerrero Jr. and Brad Armstrong, Junji Hirata b. Michiyoshi Ohara, Kunyaki Kobayashi and Akitoshi Saito b. Yuji Nagata and Kazuo Yamazaki, Hawk and Animal and Power Warrior b. Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Shinya Hashimoto, Kengo Kimura and Akira Nagami b. Osamu Nishimura and Tatsumi Fujinami, Riki Chashu and Keiji Muto and Takashi Izukabe, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masahiro Chono. November 20 Sapporo UWFI, 2000 Sellout Bilu Maduro b. James Stone ECW Little Guido Tiger Mask Toyama b. The Cobra, George Takano, Nikolai Gordo b. Naoki Sano Hiromitsu Kaneara b. Kenichi Yamamoto, Yoshihiro Takayama b. Kazushi Sakuraba, Billy Scott and Yoji Andro b. Nobuhiko Takada and Masahito Kakihara. November 20 Tokyo Karakuen Hall, Big Japan, 2000 Sellout, Yosuke Kobayashi b. Yuichi Taniguchi, Jester b. Satoru Shiga, Fantastique and Ricky Santana b. Goku and Yoshihiro Tajiri Juice and Gray Skull, Texas Hangman, b. Kendo Nagasaki and Seiji Yamakawa, Scorpion Lumberjack Match Shoji Nakamaki b. Mitsuhiro Matsunaga. November 20 Yaizu, All Japan Women, Saya Endo and Momoe Nakanishi b. Yumi Fukawa and Yukashina, Genki Misae b. Tanny Mouth, Kumiko Maikawa and Tomoko Watanabe b. Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito, Reggie Bennett and Mima Shimoda b. Asia Kong and Yoshiko Tamura, Manami Toyota b. Ri Tamada, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Tashio Yamada b. Yumiko Hara and Atsuko Mita and Shaparita Asari. November 20th Hollywood, Florida, Sunshine Wrestling Federation, 400, Paul Adonis b Punk Rock, Joe DeForia b Vampire Warrior, Johnny Torres b Snot Dudley, Bob Davis b Larry Lane, Duke Dries b Demon Hellstorm. November 21st Hull, Quebec, WWF, 1732, Sultan b Bob Holly, Farouk b Barry Windham, ICCA title Steve Austin b Hunter Hearst Helmsley DQ, Undertaker b Goldust, Carl LeDuc b Aldo Montoya, Vader b Rocky Maivia, Mark Marode Kerr Mankind, Godwins and Bart Gunn b Owen Hart and Leif Cassidy and Billy Gunn. November 21st Hakata Star Lanes, All Japan, 2800 Sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi b Kentaro Shiga Masao Inoue and Yoshinari Ogawa b Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Satoru Asako, Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi b Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Stan Hansen and Takawa Mori and Johnny Smith b Monokia Mossman and Taman Honda and Giant Baba, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace b Jun Izumida and Giant Kimala 2, The Patriot and Kena Kobashi b Sabu and Gary Albright, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao b Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama. November 21st Choshi, New Japan, 1300 Yuji Nagata b Yutaka Yoshi, El Samurai b Black Cat, Osamu Nishimura and Manabu Nakanishi b Akitoshi Saito and Kunyaki Kobayashi, Chavo Guerrero Jr. and Brad Armstrong b Norio Onaga and Jushin Liger, Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto b Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka, Hawk and Animal and Power Warrior b Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata and Keiji Muto, Akira Nagami and Kengo Kimura b Shinjiro Otani and Riki Chashu, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masahiro Chono b Satoshi Kojima and Shinya Hashimoto and Osamu Kido. November 21st Kobe, All Japan Women, 2650, Genki Misae and Saya Endo and Nana Takahashi b Yuka Shina and Yumi Fukawa and Momoe Nakanishi, All Japan Championship, Ritamata b Kumiko Makawa to win title, Tomoka Watanabe b Toshio Yamada, Mimashimoto and Atsuko Mita and Shaparita Asari b Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito and Yoshiko Tamura, Iwa vs. All Pacific title Takako Inoue b Reggie Bennett to win All Pacific title, Manami Toyota and Kyoko Inoue b Asia Kong and Yumiko Hata. November 21st Panama City, Florida, Pro Wrestling Federation, Dr. Feelgood b Black Angel, Bambi b Peggy Lee Leather, Head Shrinkers b Rock and Roll Express, George South d Italian Stallion. November 22nd Osaka Castle Hall, Rings, 7880, Nikolai Zuev b Wataru Sakata, Dick Frey b Masayuki Naruse, Mega Battle Tournament Quarterfinals, Kiyoshi Tamura b Mitsuya Nagai, Fulcon b Tsuyoshi Kosaka, Yoshihisa Yamamoto b Go Kaitsube Kuri, Bitsade Teriel b Hansen Nyman, Non-Tourney Akira Maeda b Yoshiaki Fujiwara. November 22nd Montreal, WWF, 6018, Godwins b Owen Hart and Leif Cassidy, Barry Windham b Bob Holly, Farouk b Aldo Montoya, Undertaker b Vader, Sultan b Carl LeDuc, Savio Vega b Goldust, WWF title, Sid b Steve Austin, Billy Gunn b Bart Gunn, IC title Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Mark Marrow DQ, Shawn Michaels b Mankind. November 22nd Okayama, All Japan, 2800 Sellout, Satoru Asako b Kentaro Shiga, Monokia Mossman and Johnny Smith and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa, Jun Izumida and Giant Kimala 2b Masao Inoue and Tamon Honda, Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi b Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura, and Mitsuo Momota, Gary Albright and Sabu b Stan Hansen and Takawa Mori, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao b Steve Williams and Johnny Ace, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama b Kena Kobashi and The Patriot. November 22nd Chiba, New Japan, 2350, Black Cat b Kazuyuki Fujita, Yuji Nagata b Tadao Yasuda, Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi b Brad Armstrong and Chavo Guerrero Jr., Osamu Kido and Kazuo Yamazaki b Tatsutoshi Goto and Akitoshi Saito, Shinjiro Otani and Norio Onaga b Jushin Liger and El Samurai, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masahiro Chono b Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Osamu Nishimura, Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata b Michiyoshi Ohara and Kengo Kimura, Hawk and Power and Animal Warrior b Takashi Iizuka and Keiji Muto and Riki Chashu. November 22nd Webster, Massachusetts, ECW, 300, Bubba Ray Dudley b Devon Dudley, Taz b Spike Dudley, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah b Shane Douglas and Francine, Stevie Richards b Roadkill, Louis Piccoli b GQ Gorgeous, Eliminators b Mikey Whipwreck and Chris Candido, Pitbull number 2 b Brian Lee, Rob Van Dam b Supernova, ECW title Sandman b Raven. November 22nd, Mexico City Arena, Mexico, EMLL, Solar and Mascara Magica and Super Astro B Americo Rocca and Karloff Lagarde Jr. and Astro Ray Jr., El Satanico and Emilio Charles Jr. and Ray Bucanero B Silver King and Lizmark Jr. and Rayo de Jalisco Jr., El Hijo del Santo and Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. B Negro Casas and Dandy and Hector Garza. November 22nd, Shizukuishi, Big Japan, Fukubi Yosuke Kobayashi, Ricky Santana B Satoru Shiga, Yoshihiro Tajiri B Fantastique, Grace Gulby Yuichi Taniguchi, Kendo Nagasaki B Jester, Shoji Nakamaki and Tornado Juice B Seiji Yamakawa and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga. November 22nd, Sakaide All Japan Women, Saya Endo and Yuka Shinobi Miho Wakezawa and Genki Misae, Yoshiko Tamura B Momoe Nakanishi, Mima Shimoda and Reggie Bennett B Yumi Fukawa and Takako Inoue, Hyoko Inoue B Shaparita Asari, Asia Kong and Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito B Yumiko Hata and Toshio Yamada and Atsuko Mita. November 22nd, All Castle, Ontario, Border City Wrestling, 350 Skull Gans B Johnny Swinger, Professor Maxwell B Jake Steele, Dean Miller B Brad Johnson, Maximum Intensity B Cold Brothers, Otis Apollo and Denny Cass B Briar Wellington and Pierre Francois Larry Brune B Canadian Destroyer, Scott Damore B Brooklyn Brawler DQ. November 22nd, Battleford, Saskatchewan, Iwa Hardcore Wrestling, 370, Alexis Machine B Desperado Rhino B Jim Fury, Doink the Clown B The Natural Don Callis, Desperado B Felcher the Great, Natural B Rhino. November 22nd, Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania, UWWA, HD Rider B Moose Moretti DQ, Dark Ninja B Tony Stallone DQ, Larry Winters B Lost Boy, Chuck Williams and Glenn Osborne B Marvelous Incorporated, Doug Devereaux B Doink the Clown, Ace Darling B Billy Kidman, Tito Santana B Big Slam Vader, Williams and Osborne Split Battle Royal. November 22nd, Birmingham, Alabama Aft. Show, Reality Super Fighting, 0, Ethan Andrews B Lance Bachelor, Tournament First Round, Mark Hansen B Sean McCulley, Modi Horenstein B John Dixon, Martin Villa B Anthony Macias, Gene Leidick B Geza Coleman Jr., Leon Baker B Mike Beebe, Second Round, Hansen B Horenstein, Leidick B Baker, Non-Tourney Justin Martin B Frank Shore, Final Hansen B Leidick. November 23rd, Baltimore, WCW, 6500, Rick Steiner B Barbarian 1 1/2 star, Jeff Jarrett B Big Bubba Dud, WCW Cruiserweight title, Dean Malenko B Eddie Guerrero 2 3/4 stars, Conan and Hugh Morris B Psychosis and Juventud Guerrero 2 3/4 stars, 6 B Rey Mysterio Jr. 2 stars, Lex Luger B Arnold Anderson 1 1/2 star, Falls Count Anywhere, Kevin Sullivan NC Chris Benoit 2 1/2 stars, Giant B Sting DQ 1 1/2 star, WCW Tag Titles Scott Hall and Kevin Nash B Harlem Heat 2 stars. November 23rd, Yonago, All Japan, 2850 sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Mighty Inoue B Masao Inoue, Mitsuo Momota and Rusher Kimura B Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Stan Hansen and Takawa Mori B Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida, Yoshinari Ogawa and Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kawada B Giant Baba and Tamon Honda and Manukia Mossman, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace B Gary Albright and Sabu Kena Kobashi and The Patriot and Johnny Smith B Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako. November 23rd, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, New Japan, 1910 sellout, Shinjiro Otani B Kazuyuki Fujita, Tatsutoshi Goto and Akitoshi Saito B Yutaka Yoshi and Black Cat, Osamu Nishimura B Brad Armstrong, Kengo Kimura B Hiro Saito, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi BL Samurai and Norio Onaga and Jushin Liger, Hawk and Animal and Power Warrior B Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata and Keiji Muto, Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan B Kazuo Yamazaki and Yuji Nagata, Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Kido and Shinya Hashimoto B Manabu Nakanishi and Takashi Izuka and Riki Chashu. November 23rd, Revere, Massachusetts, ECW, 947 sellout, GQ Gorgeous B Roadkill Dud, Chris Candido B Stevie Richards 2 1/4 stars, Brian Lee B Luis Piccoli 2 3/4 stars, Rob Van Dam NC Pitbull No. 2 3 1/4 stars, ECW Tag Titles, Gangstas NC Mass Transit and D. Von Dudley, Eliminators B Bubba Ray and Spike Dudley 2 stars, ECW TV title, Shane Douglas B Tommy Dreamer 3 3/4 stars, ECW title Dog Collar Match Sandman B Raven 4 stars. November 23, Sendai UWFI, 2800 Billy Scott B. Maduro, Tiger Mask Sayama B. Shoichi Funaki, Masahito Kakihara B. James Stone, Kenichi Yamamoto B. Kazushi Sakuraba, Hiromitsu Kaneara B. Yoshihiro Takayama, Nobuhiko Takada and Naoki Sano B. Nikolai Gordo and Yoji Anjo. November 23, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, JWP, Tomoko Kuzumi and Fuseo Naochi and Emi Motokawa B. Kanako Matoya and Rieko Amano and Hiromi Yagi, Esther Moreno B. Borshoy Kid, Mayumi Ozaki B. Plum Mariko, Cutie Suzuki and Dynamite Kansai B. Hikari Fukuoka and Devil Masami. November 23, Toy, All Japan Women, Momoe Nakanishi B. Miho Wakizawa, Yuka Shina B. Nana Takahashi, Shaparita Asari and Sai Endo and Etsuko Mitabi Yoshiko Tamura and Tashio Yamada and Genki Misae, Takako Inoue B. Yumi Fukawa, Kaoru Ito and Mariko Yoshida and Manami Toyota B. Yumiko Hara and Reggie Bennett and Ri Tamada, Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe B. Mima Shimoda and Asia Kong. November 23, Des Moines, Iowa, Extreme Challenge 800 Travis Fulton B. Clayton Miller, Tyrone Roberts B. Rick Graveson, Paul Wells B. Jason Godzi, Brian Dunn B. Alan Porter, Jesse Jones B. Scott Gonyo, Dave Strasser B. Rolando Higueros, Dennis Reed B. Matt Anderson, Jeremy Horn B. Gary Myers, Pataletish B. Earl Laux, Dan Severin B. Stephen Goss. November 23, Arao, Gia, Akira Hokuto and Toshie Uematsu B. Bomber Hikari and Miyako Satomura, Kaoru B. Sakura Hirota, Chigusa Nagio and Maiko Matsumoto B. Sugar Sato and Chikeo Nagashima, Hirota 1 Battle Royal. November 23, Tono, Big Japan, Ricky Santana B. Yosuke Kobayashi, Fantastique B. Satoru Shiga, Yoshihiro Tajiri B. Goku Gray Skull B. Seiji Yamakawa, Shoji Nakamaki B. Juice, Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and the Jester B. Kendo Nagasaki and Yuichi Taniguchi. November 23, Salem, New Jersey, NWA, 850 Sellout, Ace Darling B. Billy Kidman, Downward Spiral B. Lost Boys, James Morgan B. John Gray, Kid Flash B. Rick Ratchet, Mr. Puerto Rico Rasta the Voodoo Man, HD Ryder B. Icon, Don Montoya B. Patch, Jason Knight 1 Triangular Match over Jimmy Shoulders and Derek Domino. November 23, Lima, Ohio, AWA, Danny Davis B. The Sarge, Lady Satan B. Debbie Combs, Rip Rogers B. Coco Ware, Combs and Davis B. Satan and Sarge, Bob Orton B. Hercules, Virgil B. Honky Tonk Man. November 23, Plainview, New York, Universal Superstars of America, Gino Caruso B. Colt, King Kong Bundy B. Caruso, Rhino Powers B. O.J. Steele and D.W. Dudley, Greg Valentine B. Typhoon DQ Bodyguard for Hire NC L.A. Gore. November 23, North Adams, Connecticut, IWF, 1200 Brian Walsh B. Tim McNeely DQ Johnny Lee B. Raindrop, Snooky Fink Doink the Clown Steve Lombardi, B. Mike Hollow, Scott Taylor B. Bulldozer DQ, Richard Byrne B. Annihilator, James Cody, Taylor and Doink B. Bulldozer and Bob Backlund. November 24, Kyoto, All Japan, 1390 Sellout, Satoru Asako B. Manukia Mossman, Masao Inoue and Johnny Smith B. Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Tomo Honda, Masa Fuchi and Haruka Eigen and Mighty Inoue B. Mitsuo Momoda and Rusher Kimura and Giant Baba, Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida B. Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyashi Kikuchi, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taubi Sabu and Gary Albright, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama B. Stan Hansen and Takawa Mori, Kena Kobashi and the Patriot B. Steve Williams and Johnny Ace. November 24, Ichihara, New Japan, 1400 Black Cat B. Yutaka Yoshi, Norio Onaga B. Chavo Guerrero Jr., Yuji Nagata B. Kazuyuki Fujita, Shinjiro Otani and Brad Armstrong B. Jushin Liger and El Samurai, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masahiro Chono B. Akitoshi Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto and Kunyaki Kobayashi, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami and Kengo Kimura B. Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata and Riki Chashu, Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Izuka B. Manabu Nakanishi and Keiji Muto, Hawk and Animal and Power Warrior B. Shinya Hashimoto and Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Nishimura. November 24, Kawasaki JD, 700 Sellout, A. B. Sayab Princessa Blanca B. Koyama, Alda Moreno B. Neftali, Emi Motokawa and Bloody Phoenix B. Yuko Kasugi and Yuki Lee, Lioness Asuka B. Esther Moreno, Mima Shimoda and Jaguar Yokota B. Kuga and Chikako Shiratori. November 25, Salisbury, MD, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings, 3278, Lex Lugerker Arnold Anderson 1 star, Diamond Dallas Page B. Disco Inferno 1 1/4 stars, WCW TV title Steve Regal B. Tony Pena, Villano 5, 2 stars. Eddie Guerrero B. Conan 2 3/4 stars, Big Bubba v. Rick Steiner 1 star, Rey Mysterio Jr. v. Psychosis 1 star, Jeff Jarrett v. Alex Wright 3/4 of a star, Meng and Barbarian NC Harlem Heat dud. Special thanks to Dan Riley, Woody Carlson, Leonard Brand, Joe Tazzone, Bill Brown, Ken Verrett, Greg John, Georgianne Macropolis, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Dominic Valenti, Edie Bailey, Mike Mahoney Jr., Matthew Kale, Chad Olson, Matt Harold, Chuck Langerman, James Haas, Jerry Lane, Ken Doucet, Sarah Moore, Walt Spafford, Eddie Goldman, Jesse Money. Japanese Television Rundown. November 3rd, All Japan. 1. Izumida and Kimala 2 beat Dan Crawford and Rob Van Dam in 9:21 when 2 pinned Crawford, since it was his final show with the company, with a big splash. Except for a spot where Crawford and Van Dam simultaneously came off the top on 2, it was a nothing match. 2 was supposed to use a splash from the top for his finish, but he fell off the ropes, so did the splash from ground level. 1/2 of 1 star. 2. Tao and Baba and Dory Funk beat Tsuruta and Misawa and Akiyama in 15:36 when Tao pinned Tsuruta with a choke slam, mainly involving Akiyama. This was the company's 24th anniversary special match, so they put Baba, Tsuruta, and Funk, who were the foundations of the early part of company history, in with Tao, Misawa, and Akiyama, who are 3 of the foundations of the modern company. There were a few nice spots, particularly when Akiyama was in, but overall nothing much as a match either. 1 1/4 stars. November 9th, New Japan. 1. Choshu and Sasaki and Hirata beat Goto and Kimura and Ohara in 10:18 when Choshu pinned Ohara after a lariat. The fans were into it and they worked a fast pace, but the timing was pretty bad. 3/4 of a star. 2. Otani and Nagata beat Liger and Samurai in 15:27 when Otani pinned Samurai with a springboard into a spin kick. Excellent match with Samurai giving Nagata a tope, Otani following with a plancha and Liger hitting a plancha. They hit near falls back and forth before the finish. 4 1/4 stars. 3. Muto and Steiner beat Kojima and Nakanishi in 16:28 when Muto pinned Nakanishi with a DDT off the top rope. This was an excellent match, which is shocking because Nakanishi, who is probably the worst worker in the promotion, was involved. Another great performance by Muto. Kojima also did a great job carrying the match with his fire and stiff offense. 4 stars. 4. Hashimoto and Norton beat Chono and Tenzan in 15:01. The story of this match was that Hashimoto and Norton kept screwing up. Basically, Hashimoto accidentally clobbered Norton on 4 occasions before Norton finally had enough and walked out. This left Hashimoto against both, and so the match had a lot of heat. Hashimoto did well until Hiro Saito interfered. They worked on Hashimoto for a while and got some near falls on him. Finally, Saito gave him 3 sentence and Tenzan used a headbutt off the top. At this point, Norton came back and cleaned house. Norton's comeback had perfect timing when it comes when to do stuff, but less than perfect timing of the spots themselves. Finally, Hashimoto and Norton were able to work together as Norton held Tenzan for Hashimoto to deliver a flying spin kick. Hashimoto then pinned Tenzan after a brainbuster. 3 stars. November 10th, All Japan. 1. Kikuchi pinned Rob Van Dam to retain the PWF Junior title in 16:20. Real good, particularly Van Dam. Van Dam did all kinds of unique high spots and the two worked together well and built a good match. The only weakness in the match is that some of Van Dam's basic punch/kick offense still didn't look believable enough for this level, but his big moves were great. They built into some good near falls and switches back and forth before Kikuchi blocked a German suplex and turned it into a front rolling cradle for the pin. 3 1/2 stars. 2. Williams and Hansen beat Albright and Patriot. This was a special 24th anniversary bout featuring probably 4 of the 5 biggest foreign stars, no Johnny Ace, in the promotion. It was a bad match most of the way but did have a storyline worked through the match that built to a strong finish. Albright gave Williams a German suplex on the floor and Williams sold it as if he was out. Hansen had to work several minutes by himself and finally as Albright set up the dragon suplex, Williams suddenly revived and made the save. Williams tried a hot comeback with Albright but his power slam didn't work since he barely got Albright off the ground. It really didn't click until the end, when Patriot used the full Nelson Buster, full Nelson into basically a slam on Hansen for a strong near fall and Albright hit the German suplex on Williams. Patriot went off the top for a shoulder block on Hansen, who moved and it hit Albright. Hansen then lariated Patriot for the pin. 1 1/4 stars. November 16th, New Japan. 1. Choshu and Fujinami beat Nagami and Kimura in 8:20 when Fujinami made Nagami submit to the Dragon Sleeper. Better than you'd think, particularly when Choshu was in. 2 stars. 2. Liger pinned Norio Oniga with a Fisherman Buster. Oniga is well past his prime, but Liger carried him to a good match. 3 stars. 3. Nakanishi and Sasaki and Kojima beat Hashimoto and Hirata and Scott Norton in 13:44 when Sasaki pinned Hirata after a lariat. Fast-paced, generally hot match. Nakanishi is looking a lot better now that he's gotten away from doing the Kurosawa gimmick. The only weak part of the match was Nakanishi versus Norton, but at least it was stiff and believable, if not pretty. Sasaki also did a messed up Ipponze spot with Hirata near the finish. 3.5 stars. 4. Muto and Rick Steiner beat Chono and Tenzan in 10:21 when Muto pinned Tenzan after a DDT off the top rope. Another fast-paced, very good match. Chono and Tenzan make a tremendous heel tag team when it comes to timing and pacing, and Chono is one of the smartest workers around when it comes to picking his spots and the ability to have a good athletic match without doing anything but basic spots worked around his STF finisher. They are easily the best working heel tag team in the business. Muto has had his working shoes on consistently of late, and this was no exception. 3.5 stars. EMLL. Besides the Santo turn, it's been largely a slow week. Promo Azteca. Besides Los Villanos also jumping this past week from AAA with Salsero, both he and La Parka debuted on November 22nd at the major show of the week in Cuautitlán before a sellout 2,500. Villanos haven't started here yet since Villano 4 went to WCW as soon as he jumped. La Parka went on television this past week and said that he was the only in the original La Parka and that all others using the name are phonies. In response to AAA creating A La Parka Jr., Salsero's leaving was based on a business dispute in Juarez. Apparently Salsero and a wrestler known as Crazy 33 promoted an AAA show in Juarez which drew a sellout in the 9,000-seat arena, and somehow in the aftermath, Salsero and Crazy had a business breakup which he blamed on Antonio Pena and joined Promo Azteca. There were meetings this past week with EMLL about running a major joint show, but no deal was reached. AAA. Only other news is that on television, it was announced they were forming a new Atomic Juniors quartet with Team Nieblas Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. and La Parka Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. No word as of yet who Parka Jr. is. All Japan. Tag Team Tournament standings as of November 25th: Kenta Kobashi and the Patriots 6-1, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao 4-2, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace 3-2-1, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama 2-2-1, Gary Albright and Sabu 2-3, Stan Hansen and Takao Omori 2-5, and Jun Izumida and Giant Kimala 2-1-5. Hiroshi Hazi debuts on January 2nd at Korakuen Hall and will also work dates on January 3rd at Korakuen Hall and January 5th at Hakata Star Lanes. There has been nothing even hinted of late about the possibility of Nobuhiko Takada working for this promotion. Appearing on the January tour will be Steve Williams, Stan Hansen, Johnny Ace, Gary Albright, The Patriot, Bobby Duncombe Jr., Rob Van Dam, Sabu, The Eagle, Jackie Fulton, and The Lacrosse, Jim Steele. In tournament matches this week, on November 20th in Niage before 1,800, Sabu and Albright debuted as a team beating Izumida and Kimala 2, and Patriot and Kobashi beat Hansen and Amori. November 21st at Hakata Star Lanes before a sellout 2,800 had Williams and Ace over Izumida and Kimala 2, Patriot and Kobashi over Albright and Sabu when Kobashi pinned Sabu, and the main event saw Kawada and Tao beat Misawa and Akiyama in 29:46 of a 30 minutes time limit when Kawada pinned Akiyama after a kick to the face. November 22nd in Okayama before a sellout 2,800 in matches that aired on the November 24th television show, at Sabu and Albright over Hansen and Amori in 13:40 of a bad match when Sabu pinned Amori, Kawada and Tao over Williams and Ace in 20:07 when Kawada pinned Williams after a kick to the face in a great match, and Misawa and Akiyama over Patriot and Kobashi in 24:01 when Akiyama pinned Patriot with an exploder suplex in a great match. November 23rd in Yonago before a sellout 2,850 had Hansen and Amori over Izumida and Kimala 2 and Williams and Ace over Sabu and Albright when Williams pinned Sabu after a Dr. Bomb in 18:16. November 24th in Kyoto had Tao and Kawada over Sabu and Albright when Tao chokeslammed Sabu in 12:57, Misawa and Akiyama over Amori and Hansen in 13:31 when Akiyama pinned Amori, and Patriot and Kobashi, wrestling in his hometown, over Williams and Ace when Kobashi pinned Ace in 24:22. November 10th TV show did a 1.5 rating. New Japan. The new tour opened on November 20th in Soka and has been pretty much uneventful with no major matches thus far. The foreigners are the Road Warriors, Chavo Guerrero Jr., and Brad Armstrong, with Bobby Walker No showing the tour. You can figure out how the foreigners are being used. Warriors mainly working and winning in six-mans with Power Warrior, while Guerrero and Armstrong are working the junior heavyweight matches underneath and not getting much of a push. Antonio Inoki held a press conference at New Japan headquarters in Tokyo on November 21 and announced that Tiger Jeet Singh, Dory Funk and Willie Williams all wanted to wrestle him in 1997. It is believed that Williams, a one-time karate superstar in his late 40s, who had a famous martial arts match with Inoki in 1979 and has made a career in Japan for the past several years living off the fame of that loss, most recently with rings, will probably be his foe at the Dome. He'll probably finally wrestle Funk sometime this coming year. Inoki wasn't supposed to wrestle again until the Dome show, but I guess the December 1st TV special wasn't gaining enough interest, and he announced that he would make his comeback on that show against Billy Gasper, which is the name of a masked man in a main event feud during one of those forgettable periods in New Japan history. The guy who played various Gasper brothers in those days included Bob Orton, Carl Moffat, and Daryl Carolay. Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura will challenge whoever has the IWGP Tag title match, Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan defending against Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka on December 1st, at the Dome show, which only makes a dull card on paper that much duller. Fujinami and Kimura were the first IWGP Tag Team Champions back in 1985 and held the titles 3 times before splitting up their tag team in 1988 and feuding on and off since that time. Shinya Kojikawa of Big Japan will appear at the December 10th Osaka card to do an angle to build up the Tokyo Dome. November 9th TV show did a 3.7 rating. Other Japan notes. Lineup for Pancrase on December 15th at Budokan Hall is Masakatsu Funaki vs. Jason DeLucia for the King of Pancrase Championship. Frank Shamrock defends his number 1 contendership against Kyuma Kunyoku. Guy Mesjer defends his number 2 contendership against Yuki Kondo. Plus Ryushi Yanagisawa vs. Jack McLaughlin, 35 years old, who appeared as an alternate in a UFC last year losing to Joel Sutton. Making his debut, Asami Shibuya vs. Semishult, Yusuke Fuke vs. Kim Jong-wan, Keiichiro Yamamiya vs. Wesley Gasaway, 27 years old, winner of a Buddy Albeen IFC shoot fighting event on September 14th, and Satoshi Hasegawa vs. Serge Narcissian, French fighter who appeared on the Mars pay-per-view show over this past weekend losing to Willie Peters. It's a strong lineup for a regular show but very weak for a Budokan show, since Minoru Suzuki, Yoshiki Takahashi, Tatsumi Inagaki, Manabu Yamada and Takafumi Ito are all out with injuries due to the brutality of the style. The deal with Frank Shamrock was put back together about a week ago as on November 14th, Pancrase paid Shamrock his monthly contractual salary for the month and booked him on the December show. There are still unresolved issues including why Shamrock, who is the number 1 contender for the vacant title, wasn't put in the tournament to create the new champion. It appears Ken Shamrock and Pancrase will have a meeting at some point after Ultimate to try and settle their contract problems. War, Kiao Dojo, Wrestle Dream Factory, Michinoku Pro, Big Japan, Samurai Project, Ryuma Go's Promotion, Battlerts and the defunct Iwa are joining together as the union as the groups had a press conference on November 23rd. Basically it appears that these groups are joining together for their secondary level real-life war with the new Tokyo Pro Wrestling, which includes much of the falling apart UWFI and the Iwa guys that quit like Tarzan Goto, Mr. Ganasuke and Flying Kid Ishihara. The first major project together is the December 13th Sumo Hall show headlined by Genichiro Tenryu vs. Nobuhiko Takada. The rest of the card has Koji Kiao vs. John Tenta, Ultimo Dragon defending the J Crown against Rey Mysterio Jr., Lance Storm and Yuji Yasuryoka defending the International Junior Tag titles against Tiger Mask Sayama and TBA, Nobutaka Araya vs. TBA, Arashi and Osamu Tashi vs. Bam Bam Bigelow and Nobukazu Hirai, Tatsuo Nakano vs. Satoshi Yoneyama, Battlers, Ryuma Go vs. Samurai Max, both from Samurai Project, Takashi Okamura and Yoshikazu Taro vs. Kamikaze and Masakazu Fukuda, Wrestle Dream Factory, Doink the Clown, Rey Apollo, and Battle Ranger vs. Keisuke Yamada and Keizo Matsuda, Iwa Tag Team, and Jun Kikuchi vs. Seiji Yamakawa, Big Japan. In 2 of what appear to be the final shows in the history of the company, UWFI ran November 20th in Sapporo, Billy Scott and Yoji Andro over Takada and Masahito Kakiara, and November 23rd in Sendai, Takada and Naoki Sano over Anjo and Nikolai Gordeau. The promotion has 2 more dates before the end of the year, at which point it's questionable what will happen next. Rings quarterfinals of the Battle Dimension tournament on November 22 in Osaka before 7,880 fans saw Kiyoshi Tamura over Mitsuya Nagai with an armbreaker, Full Khan over Tsuyoshi Kosaka with an armbreaker, Yoshihisa Yamamoto over Gokaitsube Kuri with the choke, and Bitsaid Teriel over Hansa Nyman via knockout. In a non-tournament match and their first singles match in many years, Akira Maeda beat Yoshiaki Fujiwara in the main event. This sets up the semifinals on December 21 in Fukuoka with Tamura vs Yamamoto and Han vs Teriel. Finally got a tape of the October Rings show. Tamura vs Ilukine Mikhail was an excellent ring-style match, although not at the level of the Tamura-Han Classic the previous month. Han vs Masayuki Naruse was a god match but had a little too many pro wrestling elements thrown in, such as Han throwing Naruse over the top rope to be believable. We noted about that show since Yamamoto beat David Kakalishvili, the judo gold medalist in 1992 at 209 pounds, about not being able to make 309 these days. That was no exaggeration, as they did a weigh-in before that match and his shoot weight was 341. Also saw a 20 minutes television talk show segment on the U Japan card on November 17. It was clear every match was a shoot except Dan Severn vs Mitsuhiro Matsunaga, which was an obvious work, with body slams and sidewalk slams before the Fujiwara armbar finish. I recognize these promoters are the ones who put things together as works and not Severn, and that anyone who has ever done pro wrestling has done worked matches at one time or another, like almost every time. But my feeling is in the long run it's a mistake for promoters to put worked pro wrestling style matches on their UFC-like cards, and because Severn does so many worked matches on shoot shows, it does mean one has to question his matches going in from this point forward. Then again, in Japan, most of the shoot-style wrestling groups have been works from the start and don't suffer from a public credibility problem over that fact. Kimo gave Bigelow a brutal beating with one bare-knuckle punch to the eye after another. Bigelow's "I looked like hell after the match." Bigelow lasted longer than most do in the situation of getting straight-on blows right to his eye one after the other, as he didn't tap until he turned over and was choked out. Don Frye's win over Mark Hall was a lot more brutal than their UFC match in July. It appeared the Yoji Anjo vs Sean Alvarez match was very exciting, as the spots they aired had super crowd heat. All Japan Women ran a major show as a television taping, with the show airing on Fuji Network over this past weekend, on November 21 in Kobe before 2,650 fans with 2 title changes. Ritamato won the All Japan title from Kumiko Makawa. They had a unification match with Iwa champion Takako Inoue pinning All Pacific champion Reggie Bennett. The main event had Manami Toyota and Kyoko Inoue, who face each other for the WWA title on December 8, form a tag team to beat Asia Kong and Yumiko Hata. USWA a couple of title changes over the past week. Brian Christopher beat Macho Warrior Rick Hogan on November 18 in Memphis to regain the USWA title. Hogan has gone to greener pastures. The unemployment line is probably greener pastures than USWA these days. While we don't have a gate figure, we're told that November 18th show drew even worse than any of the recent shows, which would mean less than $1,700. Stephen Dunn and Flash Flanagan captured the USWA tag titles from the Bruise Brothers, WWF's Grim Twins, a live television show on November 23 in Memphis due to outside interference from Johnny Rotten, and it appears they were setting up a tag match in a week or two with Rotten and Sid Vicious against the Bruise Brothers. The major angle of the week was Jerry Lawler turning face, at least for 1 week. It actually started with something in real life earlier in the week. Lawler had to testify in Mississippi in front of the Gaming Commission that pro wrestling was entertainment because they wanted him to get a promoter's license to continue to run shows in some casinos. At the hearing he said pro wrestling wasn't real, saying it was as real as Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, and even though Lawler doesn't mean anything in Memphis anymore, he's still a famous name from the past in that part of the country. So Lawler admitting under oath that pro wrestling was fake became a big news story in the entire area. Lawler then came out on television as a total babyface and tried to explain this away to his loyal fans. He explained that the USWA has been promoting shows at the Sheridan Casino and Lady Luck Casino in Mississippi, and that of late, there haven't been any shows because the Boxing Commission found out. He said the Gaming Commission sent him an application for a license to run shows and claimed to get the license it would cost him at least $8,000 in an investigations fee. Lawler said on television that he doesn't know why he even got the application because he's just a wrestler, not a promoter. He then used the Roddy Piper explanation after Vince McMahon admitted pro wrestling matches were all entertainment and the winners and losers were predetermined, trying to say that he said what he said so he wouldn't have to pay $8,000 and made a joke out of saving himself that money. Said he really didn't say what the local newspaper said that he said, that pro wrestling wasn't real and it was all entertainment, and he was misquoted and just said that wrestlers don't make more money if they win their match than if they lose, but did admit he told the commission it was as real as Santa and the Easter Bunny. He then said he still believes in Santa and the Easter Bunny and brought out 2 Hooters girls dressed up as Santa and the Easter Bunny. He then ran down the local newspaper, the Memphis Commercial Appeal, saying that when they brought Mark Henry into town and went to the paper to have a story done on an Olympic hero coming to town, the paper didn't want to have anything to do with it because he was a pro wrestler. He then said he didn't think the Commercial Appeal was real and held up a USA Today and said it was a real newspaper. It was then announced that Lawler would be defending his unified title on a Thanksgiving night show in Memphis against Akeem Muhammad, billed as a 6'10", 325-pounder from the Nation of Domination, and made a joke about filling the tank of his car up with Texaco before coming to the flea market to beat the guy up. The turn came when Christopher and Johnny Rotten were scheduled in a tag match against Nation of Domination, formerly PG-13. They stuffed piledrove Rotten before the match, so Christopher took them both on in a handicap match. Finally, they handcuffed Christopher to the bottom rope and were destroying him when Lawler made the save. Christopher demanded that Lawler be his partner against Nation of Domination on Thanksgiving night, and Lawler agreed, and they wound up having another confrontation, with Lawler throwing a fireball at them. It appears there has been a split between this promotion and Burt Prentice, since Colorado Kid is gone. Razor Ramon and Diesel worked Memphis television as a tag team and looked awful. Complete show for November 28 in Memphis is Bobby Bolton vs. Reggie B. Fine, Brickhouse Brown vs. Tony Falk, Flanagan and Dunn defending the tag titles against Mike Samples and Mo, Christopher defending the USWA title against Bill Dundee, Lawler defending the unified title against Muhammad, Lawler and Christopher vs. Nation of Domination, and a turkey battle royal where the last man left in the ring is declared the Thanksgiving turkey. ECW. One of the strangest deals in a long time, a combination angle and non-angle, took place on November 23 in Revere, Massachusetts. A 17-year-old named Eric Kulas was put in the ring with the Gangstas and New Jack juiced him, apparently with an X-Acto knife. Apparently Kulas, who had never had much in the way of formal training and probably had never been gigged before, moved as he was being sliced and it hit an artery and blood flowed like a faucet. Kulas, who used the name Mass Transit, subbing for no-show Axel Rotten in a tag title match teaming with Devon Dudley, needed 50 stitches to close the wound. Supposedly Kulas came to the building with some midget wrestlers and thought he was going to do something with them, and then they bailed on him. The idea of the angle was for him to wear a uniform like a public official and get destroyed by the Gangstas, and New Jack asked him before the match if he wouldn't mind bleeding, and he apparently said that he wouldn't. He wanted to cut himself, but New Jack wanted to do it since he was more experienced. The show was held up after this incident for a long period of time because various people, including Kulas' father, were freaking out and because it took 25 minutes to clean the ring up from all the blood. The father was screaming about suing the promotion and later claimed that when he brought his son to the hospital, that they wanted to press charges of child abuse against him because the authorities were alerted because of how bloody he was, and nobody believed that something like that happened in a pro wrestling match. To get their babyface character over more, New Jack after the incident on the house mic said that either for all he cared the guy could bleed to death or even he hoped the guy would bleed to death, depending upon which version one chooses to believe. The show that night in Revere, Massachusetts drew a sellout 974, but a television taping the previous night in Webster, Massachusetts drew only 300. They continued the gimmick where the Blue World Order tried to take over at both shows. In Webster they did an angle where Chris Candido and Mikey Whipwreck were teaming against the Eliminators and Candido wouldn't help Whipwreck. Whipwreck legit injured his elbow during the match. They did an angle where Shane Douglas attacked and injured JT Smith, who was actually really injured going in. It was Smith's last weekend with the promotion as he moved from Philadelphia down to Virginia. Sandman beat Raven to headline both shows, with the Revere show being a dog collar match. Tommy Dreamer gave Francine a tombstone piledriver in Revere with her dress going south so everyone got a long panties shot. Sonny was at the show in Revere. December 7th ECW Arena lineup is Sandman vs. Raven for the ECW title in a barbed wire match, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah vs. Shane Douglas and Francine, Sabu vs. Perry Saturn and Taz vs. Rob Van Dam. Terry Funk will return to ECW in January. Next Boston area tour will be January 3rd and January 4th with the latter date in Revere. The idea is to make Revere a bi-monthly spot. A correction from last week. When writing about the David Jericho vs. Stevie Richards match at the last arena show, it mentioned that Richards won with a superkick after a low blow, but it should have read that Jericho was the one who delivered the low blow. Here and there. The amateur wrestling publication Wrestling Institute News Magazine named its all-time U.S. Greco-Roman team, and 3 pro wrestlers made the list. Dennis Kozlowski, who worked for about 1 year with UWFI in 1994, was named the best 220-pounder in history based on capturing a bronze medal in the 1988 Olympics and a silver in 1992. Brad Rheingans, who placed 4th in the 1976 Olympics and was expected to medal in the boycotted 1980 Olympics, was listed as a top contender to that crown. Rheingans wrestled throughout the 80s and got short pushes early in his career in the AWA, and became affiliated with New Japan later in his career as a mid-level wrestler and talent booker. The other listing was Jim Baron von Raschke's, one of the greatest super heavyweights ever, based on his placing 3rd in the 1963 World Championships. UFC commentator Jeff Blatnick, the 1984 gold medalist as a super heavyweight, was also on the list, although they picked Matt Ghaffari as the best super heavyweight in U.S. history. Correction from the November 18th issue when talking about steroids in sports. When the subject of track and field was brought up, the subject name should have been Butch Reynolds, but Butch Johnson. At a Killer Kowalski show on November 23 in North Adams, Connecticut, Kowalski's women's champ, Joni Lee, defended the title against Raindrop, who was male wrestler Snooki Fink under a mask with a blonde wig, and who apparently was convincing enough that some of the fans bought that he was a woman wrestler. United States Championship Wrestling is on WPPT Channel 22 in Pittsburgh on Sundays at 11 p.m. Indie pro wrestler Maurice Magruder is in the World Tough Man Contest Finals, which will be held December 6th and December 7th and appear on pay-per-view later in the month. Dan Severn worked a show on November 23rd in Des Moines, Iowa called Extreme Challenge before 800 fans. The card consisted of 9 shoot matches, while Severn worked a UWFI-style match in the main event, so fans were disappointed with that match. A book called Sports Champions, which has short bios on the 2,200 most important figures in North American sports history, lists former pro wrestlers Frank Gotch, Chris Taylor and Danny Hodge as the only ones on that list, the latter 2 for their amateur exploits. Empire Wrestling has a show on December 1st at the Boys and Girls Club in San Bernardino, California. Dan Severn works a show on December 29th at the Miccosukee Gaming Center in Miami, Florida for Sunshine Pro Wrestling, as well as Luna Vachon, Duke Dries, and Vampire Warrior. Fabulous Moolah appears for Mid-American Wrestling on December 6th in West Allis, Wisconsin. All Pro Wrestling has shows November 30th in Lakeport, California, and at its gym in Hayward, California on December 14th. UFC had a 7-minute piece largely on the show this past May in Detroit on the debut edition of CNN's American Edge television show on November 20th. Piece wasn't as negative as most, and Shamrock came off well as anything but the stereotype of what you'd expect a no-holds-barred fighter to be. So the ones stereotyped as the knuckle-draggers were the fans, which, considering the crowd in Detroit was more bloodthirsty than any UFC live event I've been to, wasn't as unfair a portrayal as many would like to say. I can't say anything good about the piece, however, as it was shallow and didn't break any ground or discuss anything that would require thought on the subject. Shamrock was on Conan O'Brien on November 22nd demonstrating holds in a comedy sketch where he came off well. WCW Nitro on November 25th in Salisbury, Maryland, 3,278 paying $38,365, was something of a blah show even though some of the short matches had good wrestling. It opened with the U.S. title tourney first-round match with Lex Luger and Arnold Anderson going to a double countout in 15:31 of a match that was worse than it sounds. Basically a nothing-happening match, with the only highlight being the Giant getting on the house mic just before they went to the finish, which was Luger holding Anderson in the rack but he was outside the ring. So both were eliminated from the tourney, which theoretically should come down to Diamond Dallas Page versus Eddie Guerrero at Starrcade. They aired clips throughout the show from the pay-per-view the night before. Larry Zbyszko, when talking about the Nick Patrick versus Chris Jericho match, said that Jericho outweighed Patrick by 100 pounds, which I guess means Nick's real weight should be right around 113 pounds. Eric Bischoff came out with the NWO and did the same interview he did 2 nights earlier in Baltimore, saying that everyone in WCW has 30 days to get their contracts switched over to NWO contracts. At this point, Marcus Bagwell and Scotty Riggs came out. Bagwell joined the NWO while Riggs protested, and the entire NWO destroyed Riggs after Bagwell gave him a neckbreaker, as if you couldn't see that one coming. It's a good move in that Bagwell is a real talented worker who is on the verge of having a career going nowhere fast. Put in the hot group, he'll at least get a chance for people to notice and take his talent seriously. Page pinned Disco Inferno with a diamond cutter in 2:14. It was short, but Page looked real good. Steve Regal retained the TV title against the unmasked Villano 4, still wearing a 4 on his tights just in case anyone couldn't figure out which Mexican he was, as Tony Pena, in 3:05 with the Regal stretch submission. Excellent transition wrestling back and forth. I guess the folks at WCW forgot that when you do this angle to humiliate the guy you make fun of, the jobber is supposed to look like a total piece of crap, not like a great mat technician. In another U.S. title tourney match, Eddie Guerrero pinned Conan when he crashed on him as Conan tried the Splash Mountain in 5:23. Another good match. Big Bubba pinned Rick Steiner in 3:16 when Sting came down from the rafters and gave Steiner the reverse DDT for the pin. Steiner coming to the ring had made some comments about Sting. Rey Mysterio Jr. pinned Psychosis in 2:19 with a Frankensteiner off the die-hard finish. Way too short. Psychosis really needs to leave this promotion or he'll become the 1990s version of Terry Taylor. At the rate he's going, having his career go the way of Taylor would be a best case, not a worst case scenario. Chris Benoit and Nancy Sullivan did an interview doing that angle that only Kevin and Nancy understand. Benoit talked about what happened in Baltimore and how the entire Dungeon of Doom couldn't get the job done. Nancy said to Kevin that it's over now. Benoit and Nancy had really good charisma together. Benoit's interviews have never been thought of as his strong point, but they are now. This was the best he's ever come across as a personality anywhere. Jeff Jarrett beat Alex Wright with a figure 4 in 2:18. Wright is another talent lost in the mix. Finale was a dud match with Meng and Barbarian versus Harlem Heat going nowhere for 4 minutes until the NWO came out and destroyed all 4 of them. As usual, WCW won the Monday battle, for something like the 23rd week in a row, although numbers were down on both sides. Nitro did a 3.1 rating and 4.6 share, 2.7 head-to-head hour, 3.5 unopposed hour, to Raw's 2.1 rating and 3.1 share. Raw's numbers continue to be disappointing since the show featured Bret's first television match against his brother, plus a live interview with Michaels. In examining the head-to-head quarters, Nitro opened with a 2.5 to 2.1 edge, but increased its lead to 3.0 to 1.9 while it had the Bischoff interview angle. The gap narrowed after that, but Nitro never had less than a 0.5 lead. Nitro's peak in the second hour was a 4.0 for the tape of the Piper Hogan angle from the pay-per-view the night before and the Mysterio Jr. vs. Psychosis match, more like a high spot, dropping to a 3.4 for Jarrett vs. Wright and Meng and Barbarian vs. Heat in the ending angle. Nitro Replay did a 1.1 rating and 2.5 share. Other weekend ratings saw Main Event at 1.4, Saturday Night at 2.7 and Pro at 1.7. Bischoff's gimmick is based on the character Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street. Jerry Sag suffered a mild concussion after getting pounded on with a chair on the November 18th Nitro by Scott Hall. The word we got was the NWO Hour of Nitro would start on December 2nd, however on the November 25th show, there was no mention of that happening next week. The last word was that Bischoff and Ted DiBiase would announce the first hour and that Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan and Mike Tenay would do the second hour, and that Larry Zbyszko would end up doing some sort of a television angle with Scott Hall. Gene Okerlund is back on the 900 line. Since with the Sleazemaster gone, hotline business dropped a ton, so they had to bring him back after all. Jeff Katz, who made the remark about Raw being moved to midnight if the ratings don't improve, which resulted in more of those threatening letters, was dumped to bring Okerlund back. Giant has a cameo in the Schwarzenegger movie Jingle All the Way, which is apparently on the verge of being a flop by Arnold proportions. Craig Pittman did an apparent heel turn on the Saturday night show. Pittman, managed by Teddy Long, was wrestling Jericho. Pittman worked as a heel, which Long didn't like. It wound up with Long arguing with Pittman, allowing Jericho to dropkick Pittman off the top for the win. Long then raised Jericho's hand after the match and managed him at the pay-per-view the next day. The house show on November 23rd in Baltimore drew about $6,586,000. Flair, who was in Jarrett's corner, got the biggest pop on the show. Scott Steiner appeared at the show in Rick's corner. Dean Malenko beat Eddie Guerrero in a cruiserweight title match. Conan and Hugh Morris destroyed Psychosis and Juventud Guerrera in what was described as a great but one-sided match. It was Guerrera's 22nd birthday and the Mexican wrestlers were on the stage singing happy birthday to him during the match. 6-pin Mysterio Jr. when Patrick's neck gave out as Mysterio Jr. had a pin, but the neck was fine when Six used a spin kick. This was really strange since the George Michael Sports Machine and a nationally syndicated sports show was at the card because they wanted to do a feature on Mysterio Jr., so they have him job and I was told the match was well below normal Mysterio Jr. standards. Sullivan Benoit ended up back in the bathroom, This time with the entire Dungeon of Doom staked out in the bathroom and they annihilated Benoit. Nancy attempted to attack Kevin but was held back by Mangan Barbarian. Giant beat Sting via DQ. They turned all the lights out, and when they were turned back on, Sting was in the ring. That sounds familiar, but I can't figure out where they got that idea from. Anyway, Sting used the bat for a DQ. Finale saw Hall and Nash, with Bischoff in their corner, overheat when Six distracted Booker T, who was pinned. Cards for December 7th in Winston-Salem and December 8th in Asheville, North Carolina have been cancelled. The feeling is that the lineups on paper were too weak for those markets, particularly with Flair being injured and so many of the wrestlers in Germany. The Nitro shows on December 2nd, December 9th and December 16th will be somewhat skeleton crews because many of the bigger names will be in Germany and none of the Mexicans are booked for any Nitros, or any shows at all for that matter, until December 30th. WWF. A few clarifications on the Raw taping in New Haven on November 18th. As aired on this weekend show, what actually happened in the Brett vs. Owen match is that Austin hit Brett with a chair for the DQ. Austin then put Brett's ankle in the chair to do the Pillman deal on him with Owen cheering him on, but Davey Boy Smith ran in and stopped him saying that enough was enough. Austin tried again and Smith stopped him. Austin ended up hitting Smith with a chair and then Owen began arguing with Austin, who walked off. They are trying to get Austin over as a babyface since the Lone Wolf is a babyface role and he's getting cheered anyway, but still keep him a heel since his biggest programs will be against faces. The babyface/heel dichotomy is on the verge of being dead anyway. What happened with the Justin Bradshaw babyface turn is that Bradshaw and Zeb were facing Jesse James in a handicap match and Zeb caused Bradshaw to lose the match. After the match, Bradshaw lariated Zeb and branded him. Sounds like Zeb's career prospects aren't the best. The Undertaker-Mankind match was taped for Raw and I believe airs on December 9th and is said to have been an outstanding match. They also did a deal where Mark Mero posed with the IC belt, which would lead one to believe that Mero will win the title before the next pay-per-view. But I'm told it was all a swerve. Smith missed house shows this week because he left for England early because his sister was very ill. Leif Cassidy took his place teaming with Owen Hart. Marty Jannetty's actual injuries at Survivor Series were a chipped bone in his foot and a bad ankle sprain. The ankle injury is more serious than the foot injury, but they are hopeful he'll be back in action in a week or so. Ahmed Johnson's return is now set for the Raw tapings on December 16th and his first house show will be on December 26th in Chicago. The idea right now is to not book a match against Farouk for as long as possible to create more anticipation of such a match. Here's the best detailed version of the Curt Hennig story I can come up with. Hennig was contemplating a huge lump sum settlement from Lloyd's of London, which was either $150,000, according to WWF sources, or $300,000, according to others. To get the settlement he'd have to basically sign a deal that he was permanently disabled and could never wrestle again. Apparently as they were doing the angle for the match with Hunter Hearst Helmsley, while what they did was a backup plan, apparently the WWF was under the impression there was at least a solid chance Hennig was going to come back and wrestle as a face, although Hennig apparently never gave them a yes or a no until just a few days before the Raw match. Since WWF figured he might wrestle and since he was under a disability deal with Lloyd's, the WWF's legal department sent a memo to Lloyd's to try to reach a settlement regarding the deal. At that point Lloyd's nixed the idea of paying Hennig the lump sum for permanent disability because they believed he was thinking about returning to the ring, so therefore he wasn't permanently disabled. Hennig was furious thinking the WWF had double-crossed him, which led to him contacting WCW and going there as revenge. After no-showing the weekend of November 9th, he and McMahon talked things out and McMahon offered him a 5-year wrestling contract with a $300,000 per year downside guarantee, which Hennig verbally agreed to, and McMahon felt everything was cool since Hennig was guaranteed far more money in the contract than whatever he was going to make in the Lloyd's settlement. Hennig had during the week told others in the WWF that he was coming back as a wrestler and had been training with Brad Rheingans. While we don't know the WCW figures, apparently Bischoff's offer for a 3-year deal was higher, so Hennig went with WCW, without telling McMahon, and no-showed an autograph session, the Hall of Fame dinner, Survivor Series and the Superstars voiceovers. The WWF is claiming Hennig has breached his contract, which expires in May, by no-showing the past 3 weeks. The threat is there for this to wind up in court because the belief is that WCW will debut Hennig well before May. The latest on the Shotgun Saturday Night Show is that it's scheduled for a January 4th start date. While this hasn't been officially confirmed, my belief is that they have a TV deal done and are keeping it quiet for fear WCW will try and buy it out, because you don't book buildings a few weeks out on the hopes you can at the last minute put together a TV deal. The show will air live at midnight on Saturday nights and will be put up on satellite, so it'll air live on a syndicated network. They are attempting to put together both Eastern and Central Time, and on a 3-hour tape delay on the West Coast, with Vince McMahon and Todd Pettingle most likely as announcers. McMahon, Bruce Pritchard and Paul Heyman went out to scout various nightclubs in New York City to revolve tapings in, although Heyman is not an official consultant for the show, but it wouldn't be a shock to see him have some kind of involvement in it. What's interesting about this is that McMahon had heavily criticized WCW for the expense of going live every week because of the six-figure costs each week of doing such a show, and now he's doing it himself, with similar costs of going live, but doing a syndicated show that has the added expense of perhaps having to buy time, having to put together a syndicated network that will almost surely not reach as many homes as TNT, and being in a time slot where it's going to be basically impossible to draw the kind of ratings WCW does with its live show, so they can't make nearly as much selling ads for the show. In addition, by running a live show at midnight on Saturday, it'll mean WWF has to water down its Saturday night live show, since some of the stars will have to be pulled from the tour each week, and Saturday night is theoretically the most profitable night for house shows. Savio Vega twisted his knee but didn't even miss a show. Some pay-per-view locations for 1997 after Mania. April 20th in Green Bay, May 11th in Baltimore, June 8th is King of the Ring in Providence, July 6th in Calgary, August 3rd is SummerSlam at the Continental Arena, Meadowlands, in East Rutherford, New Jersey, September 7th in Louisville. Other pay-per-view dates are October 5th, November 9th Survivor Series, and December 7th. You can see they are making a habit of, as the year goes on, doing the pay-per-view shows as early in the month as possible. With all the shows on pay-per-view, in the cable guides, the positioning of the advertising favors the shows early in the month. Events like SummerSlam and Survivors are a couple of weeks earlier in the year than they've been traditionally. First two house shows after Christmas are December 26th in Chicago, Sid vs. Mankind, Brett and Michaels vs. Vader and Austin, and December 27th in Nassau Coliseum, Sid vs. Mankind, Michaels vs. Austin. Preliminary estimates for Survivors have ranged between 0.48 and 0.58 by rate, which have to be a huge disappointment considering it was Hart's first match back and how well promoted the show was. Road agent and former wrestler Arnold Skaaland collapsed backstage at the Survivor Series, apparently because his blood sugar was low, but was back at work by November 20th. Superstars taping on November 19th in Springfield, Massachusetts before 5,230 fans, 3,447 paying $42,128, had only a few major notes. Austin beat Bart Gunn when Bart was distracted by Billy. After the match, Austin used the stunner on Billy as well. Headbangers, Len Ruth and Chaz Warrington debuted and looked pretty good. Jesse James beat Sultan by DQ. Goldust double count out Helmsley for the IC title. Jim Cornette did an interview asking Rocky Maivia to let him manage him, and Maivia ripped up the contract. They are doing the gimmick where all the managers are after Maivia and he turns them all down. No doubt he's got potential, but in recent years fans have shoved back at most green guys shoved down their throats, and this is beginning to look like a shove rather than natural. Hart and Smith and Crush over Jake Roberts and Mero and Vega. Ahmed Johnson has a confrontation with PG-13 and Farouk which apparently came off well. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon beat Headbangers in a match said to have been disappointing. Bart Gunn beat Helmsley via DQ when Billy interfered. Crush double count out Vega. Austin pinned Barry Windham in a nothing match. Shawn Michaels beat Farouk via DQ when PG-13 interfered. In a dark match, Sid and Undertaker beat Vader and Austin when Sid pinned Vader. Other house shows this week saw November 20th in White Plains, New York draw $2,075 and $32,302. November 21st in Hull, Quebec drew $1,732 and $28,267. And November 22nd in Montreal drew $6,018 and $121,290. In White Plains, they held a 20-man mini Royal Rumble which came down to Diesel, Crush, and Maivia, and if you can't figure out who won that, you aren't paying attention. Maivia did do his first job in Hull to Vader. Austin pinned Goldust in White Plains and Austin received basically 100% cheers. In Montreal, Michaels pinned Mankind in the main event, while Sid had a title defense pinning Austin. Cassidy changed his look and dropped the geek persona on his own as a way to get noticed, basically because his contract is coming up and he recognizes at this point he's going nowhere. On Live Wire they made mention that WWF is apparently reviving the idea of doing a call-in radio show. Jim Ross was still making subtle references this weekend of feuding with Vince McMahon, but it's been heavily downplayed. At one point Ross talked about the crowd in Springfield being a capacity crowd and saying this wasn't a theme park side show with a crowd herded in like cattle, in reference to WCW Worldwide, or in a bingo hall. The line would come across a lot better if it really was a capacity crowd. Weekend ratings were well up from last week with Blast Off at 0.7, Livewire at a record 1.4, and Superstars at 1.5. On Raw November 25th, they did a live interview with Michaels and Jose Lothario where they claimed Lothario's heart was damaged in the deal with Sid. They acknowledged Michaels being booed at MSG and tried to do what they did last year with Kevin Nash after he lost the title by giving him an attitude. Flash Funk looked awesome both in the ring as a wrestler and in his entrance gimmick with the women in his Superstars debut over the weekend. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.